Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And currently we are answering probably the most important part of the special military operation, when every single side, when both the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Americans and the Europeans are trying to settle the conflict on the territory of Ukraine and to get as much as possible benefits from the situation, from this settlement. First, let's talk about Washington, about the 47th President of the United States of America, and because today he made lots of very important statements, and let's take a look and discuss them in details. Ukraine appears ready to give 20% of its land to Russia as long as it is considered de facto recognition, not de jure. Trump promises to reveal the contents of the peace plan in the next 3 days. According to the publication, it may include the deployment of European forces and separate peacekeepers to jointly monitor the ceasefire by a commission of Russians, Ukrainians and a third non-NATO country. So according to him, Ukraine is about to recognize these territories under complete Russian control. This is completely different situation than recognition of these territories of the part of Russian Federation. So according to this plan, according to this small part, this small piece of plan, United States of America and Ukraine discussed the situation when these territories from Crimea to, let's say, northern part of LPR, so all these territories would be recognized as a territory under Russian control, but they will be the part of Ukraine. So this is very interesting schema, and I believe that Russia will never accept this because all these territories are already a part of the Russian Federation according to its constitution. Another important thing, recent US meetings with Russia and Ukraine were very good. That was also stated by Trump. The American president promised to speak in more detail on this matter in the next 3 days. Earlier, Ukrainian Goncharenko announced a meeting on Ukraine in London tomorrow. So tomorrow, on Wednesday, on the 23rd of April of 2025, there are going to be a very important meeting between the representatives of Ukraine, representatives of the United States of America and the European countries, where all these representatives will discuss the situation and the peaceful settlement. Ukraine Zelensky says Ukrainian delegation to hold talks in London with UK, France, US representatives on Wednesday, so tomorrow. Ukraine is ready to move forward in talks as constructively as possible. Easter made it clear that it is Russia's actions that are prolonging the war. Zelensky says had a good and detailed conversation with British Prime Minister Starmer. So once again, according to Zelensky's statement, he blames and he believes that the Russians and Russia is the main side who broke and who ruined ceasefire during the Easter. So of course Russia has completely different positions, completely different opinion regarding this situation. We have lots of statements made by the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. Combat operations have resumed. We made it clear from the start we supported the ceasefire, especially during these holy Easter days celebrated by Catholics, Protestants and Orthodox Christians alike. That's why we proposed it. Ukraine broke the Russian declared ceasefire via multiple attacks and attempted breakthrough. So we see that the Russians are blaming the Ukrainians are blaming the Russians. And it is very interesting to understand who indeed broke the ceasefire. So, when talking about ceasefire and who indeed broke it, so we have lots of very important updates today, and let's discuss them in details. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction, where very heavy clashes continue for the territory of the church. I'll remind you that several days ago, the Russians reported that as a result of offensive operation, they managed to establish complete control over the territory of church, and we have a lot of videos and lots of details how the Russians were raising their flags on the territory of the church. For example, this video was published by the 17th of April of 2025, so several days before the ceasefire, the Easter ceasefire. But the interesting thing is that today several pro-Russian resources published this video, and in this video we can see how the Russians were bombing the territory of church with FAP, so with FAP 1500 probably, and as a result of this attack, another building of this complex was completely reduced to ruins, and the Russians reported that they attacked the temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine. Later, we got another statement from neutral and independent mappers that the Ukrainians during the ceasefire, during the Easter ceasefire, regrouped and counterattacked the territory of Church, and they managed to restore control over this territory. So as for this particular example, we see that the Ukrainians was the side who broke the ceasefire, who attacked the Russians and forced them to fall back. Anyway, in telling the truth, this morning when we got this article, we colored the territory of Church as a territory in the complete Ukraine control, but right before we started making this video, the group of forces north made their official statement regarding the situation around the church, and they reported that the Russians by the noontime of let's say by the 12 p.m. of the 22nd of April of 2025 managed to restore control over the territory and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So once again, we have colored the territory of Church back in the Russian favor. Anyway, this is one of the examples where we can see who exactly ruined and broke the ceasefire. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Vchans direction. During the previous days, we start receiving lots of updates from this territory, and when talking about the previous days, the Russians were bombing and attacking the logistic of the armored forces of Ukraine. Lots of bridges, lots of river crossings were destroyed by the Russians as a result of missile strikes, as a result of artillery strikes, and obviously those attacks led to complete collapse of Ukrainian logistic. And now we see that the Russians start using the tall flamethrower systems, and as for the previous night, the Russians were attacking this huge forest, and we believe that the Russians are planning to begin offensive operation in this area in the very near future, and maybe the Russians are attacking this forest already, because the tall flamethrower system is a very powerful artillery system that allow the Russians probably to move further. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the vicinity of the settlement of Redkadub. This is the Liman direction. We discussed the situation in this area yesterday, and today we got another article published by the neutral mappers, and according to them, according to the neutral resources, the Ukrainians counterattacked in this area also during the Easter ceasefire. This is another place where, according to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians broke the ceasefire, and as a result of counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the tree lines and the fortifications between the settlement of Redkadub and the settlement of Nova. So these fields were taken by the Ukrainians. As you can see, these territories were considered as a contested area, and today the neutral mappers reported that these territories were restored by the Ukrainians. So this is the second place where, according to several resources, Ukrainians broke ceasefire. Another place where the Ukrainians broke ceasefire is the settlement by the name of Tarskoye. Today, the same sources reported that Ukrainians managed to restore complete control over the settlement of Tarskoye and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. As for the beginning of the 22nd of April of 2025, the Russians controlled just the fields, fortifications, and the tree lines around the settlement of Tarskoye without any position, without even a single position on the territory of the settlement itself. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Seversk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation towards the village of Grigorovka. Currently, this is the primary target for the Russians. We see that the Russians are advancing, and the Russians are showing very nice, very good dynamic since probably the beginning of April. Almost every single week we make several adjustments in the Russian favor, and for example, during the previous let's say 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take additional fortifications in the fields between the settlement of Bilogorovka and Grigorovka. We came to this based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking, how the Ukrainians were bombing the Russian units in these fields when they were trying to evacuate their soldiers, wounded soldiers, and so on. So there are lots of episodes in this long video, and one of the episodes took place exactly in this point, and based on this video we have adjusted the map by adding additional territory and the complete Russian control. So we see that the Russians are getting closer and closer, and we see that the news around the settlement of Seversk is tightening and tightening. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction. As for this area, this is probably the only place where the Ukrainians didn't attack the Russians during the Easter ceasefire. According to information we have, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Delievka. At least this information was published by several pro-Russian resources. As for different neutral resources, the Russians Russians indeed entered the village of Deliivka, but there are still very heavy clashes on the territory of the settlement. The Russians are trying to force Ukrainians to fall back from this pocket, and most likely during the next several hours, maybe during the upcoming night between the 22nd and the 23rd of April of 2025, the Ukrainians would completely abandon these positions because of risk of being encircled by the Russians. Now let's move further. As for the mine, the Russians are still attacking these positions. There are still Ukrainians on the territory of this mine, and today we got another video that confirms the presence of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of this facility. So we see that there are still very heavy clashes, and that the Russians, since their breakthrough operation, haven't managed to force the Ukrainians to fall back. There are still very heavy clashes, and the Ukrainians have possibilities to support and supply their forces on the territory of this stronghold. Now let's move further. As for the Liman direction, today we got additional icons, additional videos with flags. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take under complete control the settlement by the name of Sukhaya Balka. This information was published, as you can see, by neutral resources and by pro-Russian resources. Very likely today or tomorrow or this week, obviously the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information as well. So this is, for example, the situation by the end of the 21st of April, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 22nd of April of 2025. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pavlovka direction, and this is the third place, the third area where the Ukrainians carried out their counter-offensive operation during the Easter ceasefire. And as a result of counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement of Kotlerovka. The Ukrainians managed to restore complete control over the settlement by the name of Troitska, and the Russians were forced to fall back from the southern part of the settlement of Bogdanovka. So as you can see, the Ukrainians counterattacked, and that counterattack was pretty successful. The Ukrainians managed to restore some positions, and the Ukrainians managed to win several days or even weeks before the Russians are able to answer the Dnipro region by establishing control over these territories. So very interesting to see what is going to be next, but obviously, according to Putin's statement, he was very angry and very upset regarding the situation. Obviously, Putin is going to use this, let's say, during the negotiation process and talks and possible talks that are going to take place in London. Putin is not going to join the talks in London, but according to information we have, they're going to be something like a channel between the Russians and the Americans during this conversation, and parties will be able to talk at the same time and to discuss all issues together. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the southeastern part of the settlement of Battiri. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources from the 79th Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, who are responsible for the protection and defense of this direction, reported that there are very heavy clashes are taking place in the southern part of the settlement of Battiri. So according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians are trying to take positions in the southeastern part, and maybe today is the breaking point in the battle for this territory. Now let's move further, and as for the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions and to answer the farms that located in the southeastern part of the settlement of Kupiansk. This information was provided by neutral mappers. As for pro-Ukrainian resources, the Russians indeed managed to improve their positions, but just to take several true lines to the south of this area. But this territory that were taken by the Russians, according to neutral mappers, the pro-Ukrainian sources show as a contested area. During the previous night, also the Russians launched massive drone attack all over the entire city of Odessa and Odessa region. According to information we have, several explosions, very heavy explosions, were recorded on the territory of the city, and the Russians reported that as a result of this attack, they managed to destroy the biggest, let's say, military facility that Ukrainians were using to produce drones. So something big and very important was destroyed as a result of Russian attack. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.